Welcome to Uncolored. I'm Kevin Metcalf. First of all, I want to thank you for all the support you guys have been giving me. I'm very overwhelmed by it, and I mean that. I would have never expected. I know it's not crazy like others' piano, but listen, I would have expected this because I have to edit the videos, and I see what you're looking at. So, thank you for the support. Today, we're going to get into something back into what we did a couple of videos ago. This is not going to be some frivolous sports thing, although I know you guys seem to like those better. But I got to be honest, we're going to dig a little bit deep today. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit, but obviously I'm not going to use a whole lot of technical terminology because I like to make these ideas practical. But you're going to have to follow along and pay attention, and I may lose some folks, and I got to be honest, I'm not going to be responsible for what happens to you. If you remember the video that we looked at or that I analyzed in the last couple of videos, it was of a guy named Matt Slick and Warren Magritte. They were talking about an idea called total inability, which is one of the components of this bigger idea called Calvinism. And again, I don't care if you're a Calvinist or not. That's your thing. You got to do whatever you got to do. I'm simply talking about ideas and how we do or don't really deal with ideas that are different than our own. So if you'll remember this part in the video.
I'll try and go through this quickly. What you just heard was a heresy fest. He said the debate rests on epistemology as much as Scripture. That's heresy. The reason it's heresy is he is raising his rationalization and his epistemological studies to the level of Scripture.
Okay, heresy. Matt Magritte, if you remember the video, and please take a look at it, not necessarily even my analysis of it, but you can look at the original video of Matt Slick and Warren Magritte talking about total inability. And Warren Magritte challenged the idea of total inability on an epistemological basis, that it seemed to cancel out the very thing you need to affirm total inability. Now, that's just Warren Magritte's impression as he thought about the idea of total inability, qua Calvinism, as opposed to Warren Magritte's understanding of what the Bible has to say. What Warren Magritte is doing is seeing what's in the Bible as different from what Calvinism teaches about the Bible. Warren Magritte sees them as different things. Okay? Now that's key. Because in these kinds of discussions, and this is the kind of thing that happens in literally all arenas of thought, all areas of society, that we mistake our belief about some reality for the reality. And when I was going over one of the thumbnails, I like to look through a lot of fine art. And one of the thumbnails that I got, there's my dog leaving the room. One of the thumbnails that I came across was a picture that I'm going to show you by a gentleman named Rene Magritte, who was a surrealist kind of back in the 60s. And the reason why I was so pleased with finding this picture was my background is art. I was an art major in college, then I didn't finish the degree. But a lot of what you're studying is art history. And at the time when I was looking at the painting that I'm going to show you, I didn't really understand what they were talking about. But, over time, things will come back to you sometimes and you're like, that's what they were talking about. And that's exactly what happened when I saw this picture again as I was going over some pictures for thumbnails. So let me show you a little bit about Magritte and just talk a little bit about the art piece as we get into this discussion about labels, because really what we're going to be talking about is this label of heresy and what does it mean, and is it an effective tool for learning about ideas? So this gentleman, his name is Rene Magritte. He was a surrealist artist in the 60s. And just a little bit about surrealism. Surrealism is different from abstract art, and sometimes people will confuse the two. Abstract is a little bit more, I don't want to say random, but it's more immediate, more of a visceral thing. And the ideas that it captures are sometimes very, very difficult to understand. And really, it's more of it's a thing that connects more on a subconscious level than a conscious level. Whereas surrealism, while the pictures often kind of look weird or odd sometimes, everything in a surrealist painting is very deliberate. The color palette is very deliberate. The objects within the painting, very deliberate. You know, if you saw a painting that had 4 clocks in it, there's a very specific reason why there's not 5 or 3 clocks in that particular painting. So when a surrealist does a painting, generally speaking, every element in that painting, the relationships between the elements, where they are in the painting, every single thing is deliberate. And they're trying to get you to see something through the painting that isn't the painting. They're trying to get you to some idea, or oftentimes, and what my instructor told me, which I thought was brilliant, what she said was, the artist isn't trying to tell you what to think about the painting, but to get you to think through looking at the painting about something. Because oftentimes the ideas that you come up with were nothing that was in the mind of the painter when they painted it, but they just want you to think, which is fantastic. Even though they often have some idea that they're trying to get to with the painting too. So this is one of the paintings that he does, just as an example. This isn't the one that we're going to be talking about. This is called, I think it's called The Son of Man. And you see a guy with some fruit in front of his face, it looks like a green apple. But the fact that the guy's wearing a suit, the bowler hat, some would say is a self-representation or a painting, the painter doing a self-portrait. Because Magritte walked around dressed similar to this, always wore a bowler hat, or often did. But the water behind him, the gray sky above in the background, that brick wall behind him, every single thing in that picture is there for a very specific reason, to convey some idea or to help push along a particular, push your mind in a particular way. But the painting we're going to be looking at today, or the subject of today's presentation, is this one here. This painting is called The Treachery of Images. Okay, it's so brilliant. And when I saw this back in the day, I thought, it's a picture of a pipe, who cares, right? and actually, even today, you'll find there's a lot of quote-unquote parodies of this particular painting, because at the surface it seems pretty, pedestrian. The caption under the pipe is, in French, I can't pronounce it, "Ce n'est pas une pipe," "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." But in English, what it says, translates to, is, "This is not a pipe." Now, again, on a very superficial level, yeah, that's obvious. Although what it's telling you is, while you look at it and you say, well, that's a pipe, the painting says, no, it's not a pipe. The idea is that a pipe is a different thing than the artist's attempt to capture the pipe on this canvas. That's the idea. That what you're looking at is not the reality. What you're looking at is, again, an attempt to model the reality, to capture something true about the reality. And they're not the same thing. Now, again, even though it's a little bit of a deeper understanding of this particular painting from my perspective, I think it's a more profound idea even than that. And here's what I mean. If you've ever heard of this saying, it goes, perception is reality. What the saying means, I think, is that the way people see things, when they get information about something, they usually accept whatever that information is as the reality. So oftentimes somebody will come to work and they say, hey, did you hear what happened in the news? Some event, someplace in some location, they'll tell you this is what happened. As if that's exactly what happened. What Magritte is bringing out in this painting is this. Even though what you heard on the news may or may not have been some aspect of the event that occurred. The event that occurred is not only a much richer source of information than can ever be captured in a news report. There's much more going on. There's so many more perspectives. You can see it from so many different ways, and every different way you look at that particular event, you're going to grab something different from it. That's the idea behind this painting. I shouldn't say that. It's not the idea, but that's one of the things that this painting suggests. That while maybe from this perspective, this is what the pipe looked like, there's so many more perspectives that you can use to draw a picture of the pipe that would look different from this, even though you're trying to model the exact same reality. Another idea that this touches on or points towards is the concept of the correspondence theory of truth. And if you'll remember earlier in this series, I started off by giving some of the tools that we're going to be using while talking about some of these topics that we're going to be getting into. And one of them was the correspondence theory of truth. And if you remember, the correspondence theory of truth is an idea about what truth actually is. And the correspondence theory of truth says that there's some objective reality out there, and we make statements or have ideas or beliefs about these objective realities. So if I were to say, yesterday I had a tuna sandwich, then what that would mean is there's something called yesterday that we would understand as yesterday. There would be something that we'd understand as a tuna sandwich, and there would be some relationship that I could have with this tuna sandwich in that thing called yesterday that would constitute me eating it. And if all of those things are the case, then the statement, I had a tuna sandwich yesterday, would be called true because it corresponds with something else. But as the painting points out, that while my belief that I had a tuna sandwich yesterday does capture a lot of the truth of this event, my understanding about it is different. It's not the same thing. They're two separate things. I could misremember. Maybe it was the day before yesterday. In other words, the event itself is unchanging and immutable. My attempt to capture it with my cognitive abilities and place it in what we call the noetic structure, what's called the noetic structure, just your belief system. That's the easier way to say it. To gather the data of some event and put it in your belief system is an imperfect process that cannot capture the richness and fullness of the event itself. That's why they're two separate things. One is your attempt to model a reality. The other thing is the reality itself. That's one of the ideas suggested by this painting. That's why it's a brilliant idea. It's so freaking profound. And I think a lot of people miss that because when I say, hey, when people say perception is reality, that's how we behave. But what the picture suggests is that's not the truth. Perception is not reality. Your perception of reality and reality itself are two different things. That's the idea. And while that may seem obvious, that is not how we behave. We behave as if our perception is reality. We operate as if our belief system or the things we believe and the truth, the reality that we're trying to model, are the same thing. So when people question our belief system, we behave as if they're questioning reality itself because we fail to make the distinction. Okay? That's a little wordy, but as normal, I've created some slides because I always need pictures to see things. Now, we've done this before, but I've changed it up a little bit because, again, as I say, these are pretty heady ideas, and I need colorful pictures to help me understand them. So we talked about before, your noetic structure is a collection of all the things you believe in the relationships between those things. The thing on the right is just some reality. It could be the whole ball of wax. It could be something in reality, like a paperclip, whatever it is. But your noetic structure is the attempt at modeling some part of reality, trying to represent it properly. So let's take this reality and let's just say it is music. So the music that you're trying to model, the reality you're trying to model is music, okay? So you're going to use your cognitive faculties, cognitive faculties, your eyes, your ears, your senses, your logic and reason, and all these things. And if they're working reliably, you're going to try and capture some aspect of this thing called music. Maybe it's learning how to play guitar and you play a few songs, right? Maybe you're learning how to sing or play the piano or just read music or be a conductor, whatever it is. There's some part of this thing, this reality called music, and you're trying to incorporate it into your belief system way of understanding the music, this thing called music. Important points are these. One, absolute knowledge is impossible. No matter how brilliant you are or how long you study this thing called music, it's impossible for you to know everything about it. Okay, that would be called absolute knowledge. You're not going to be able to know everything about it, and you're not going to be able to know everything about it perfectly. The best you can do is to find some part of it and model it imperfectly. It might be real close, but it's very difficult to get a one-to-one representation of whatever part of reality that you're trying to model and the reality itself. I mean, in your noetic structure. In other words, the idea that you understand something about the world perfectly without fail, without flaw, is incredibly low. But the great thing about that is recognizing that your noetic structure and the reality that you're trying to model are two separate things. It leaves you the ability to continue to grow and to continue to build knowledge because you understand they're not the same thing. You're just trying to grasp aspects of it. And the more you grasp, the greater your knowledge can grow of that particular topic. Again, it'll be imperfect. It's not going to be exactly the same. You're never going to get the whole thing. But as long as I remember that my ability to try and understand it, model this thing, isn't the same thing as the reality, then it's much easier for me to remain open for more information about the reality. Okay? If I don't have that kind of a model and start to think that I know everything about it, then I lose the ability to grow and take on more information. And this is why. When you forget that your belief system is not the same thing as the reality that you're trying to model, you begin to superimpose your belief system over that model, thinking like they're the same thing. That's the idea of perception being reality. And you lose the ability to distinguish between the two. And you start to behave as if your belief system is the reality. And while you're not claiming that, if somebody goes, well, what do you think? You know everything? You're going to go, no. The dogmatic person will go, no, I'm not saying I know everything. But they're going to behave as though their understanding of any particular issue is perfect. It's a perfect representation of that reality and needs no modification, no adjustment at all. And again, the possibility that that's the case is almost zero. But dogmatism treats your noetic structure and reality as if they're the same thing. And there's no discrepancy between the two. That's why oftentimes when you're having a conversation with somebody and you go, well, the way you're understanding that, I don't think it's correct because when you look at the thing, I see some differences. They respond oftentimes with incredulity. They respond like this.
You just heard was a heresy fest.
They start calling you a heretic because in their mind, you're not questioning their belief system. You're questioning reality itself because they've mixed the two up. That's what dogma does. So when you're having a conversation with somebody about something and they call you a heretic, okay, or a homophobe, or a racist, or a whatever, misogynist, whatever, okay? The problem with that, well, there's a lot of problems with that, but with regard to trying to gather information to model reality better, there's no information conveyed in "you're a heretic." There's no information there. Because when you started off this interaction, the fact that you didn't agree with how they understand reality, you both already knew that. And calling somebody a heretic just tells you that. It only tells you that the way I understand reality is different the way you understand reality. And because I understand reality perfectly, the dogmatic person is thinking, then you have to be wrong because you disagree with me. Because what the dogmatic person does is they don't judge everything based on how it looks compared to reality. They judge things based on how it looks to their particular dogma or orthodoxy because they've overlapped the two. Their orthodoxy is reality. It looks something like this. So you're talking to somebody and they're telling you about their ideas, or you hear about their ideas, and you go, I think there's a problem with the way you're understanding this part of reality and the reality itself, right? Either I see some things about the reality that aren't represented in your model, or there's some things in your model that I don't see in the reality itself. There's something different about it, okay? Now, what you're trying to do is, what you're hoping to do is have a discussion about your two understandings of the pipe, of the reality, the thing in the middle, compared to your two models. That's the discussion you're hoping to have, okay? But what ends up happening is this. You end up talking about only their particular orthodoxy, their particular dogma. And when you're trying to say, well, no, that's not what I'm talking about the reality opposed to your dogma and the differences between the two. It's not like they disagree with you. It's they can't even hear you. They don't even know what you're talking about, because as far as they're concerned, their orthodoxy is the reality. They're indistinguishable from each other. So they don't even know what you're talking about. It's impossible to disagree with them, because to disagree with them is to disagree with reality, because they're the same thing in their mind. And if you don't believe me, this is a quote by a guy named Charles Spurgeon, who I'm pretty sure he's gone now, but he's a very famous theologian, and he was a Calvinist, which doesn't mean anything bad about the guy. Charles Spurgeon, it was a very well-known Calvin. I don't know if he was Calvin. I guess he was a Calvinist, because he says he's a Calvinist and loves Calvinism, but he also said things that would make you question his understanding of it, or whether he believed it or not. I don't know. But here's what he says. To deny Calvinism is to deny the gospel of Jesus Christ. So in his mind, at least at this particular time, whatever the gospel of Jesus Christ is, Charles Spurgeon thinks that Calvinism is not an attempt to understand it, some idea that points you to the gospel. He says they're the same thing. They're indistinguishable from each other. That's tough to say. Here's another quote along the same lines. I have my own private opinion, which is nice for him to at least say. That was nice. There's no such thing as preaching Christ and him crucified unless we preach what nowadays is called Calvinism. It's a nickname to call it Calvinism, but again, he goes on to say Calvinism is the gospel and nothing else. So it seems to indicate that for him, this idea of Calvinism and the gospel, no difference, no distinction. But it seems to me that you could talk about the gospel and have a whole conversation and do a whole series about what the gospel is, and never bring up Calvinism. And it seems like you can do weeks on Calvinism and never bring up the gospel. Seems to me. But for some people, and unless Charles Spurgeon is the only one of this mindset, and it may be the case, but I think the probability is very low, there are other people who think that Calvinism and the gospel, it's the same thing. They've taken their belief, their orthodoxy, their attempt to model some reality, and made them the same thing. That's the perception is reality. And again, why I think that that Magritte picture is so important is it's a reminder that, listen, that's a great picture of a pipe. I'm sure if you looked at the pipe, you go, boy, that's real close. I mean, it looks almost exactly the same. But Magritte reminds us they're two different things. And there's so much more to the reality than you could ever capture in this particular picture. That's all he's saying. So, when you get stuck here with someone who's steeped in dogma, and again, it doesn't have to be about Calvinism, it could be about some social issue, some political thing, sports, it doesn't matter. When you're talking to somebody who's taken their belief or their understanding about a particular circumstance and have placed that over the reality as if they're the same thing, their perception has now become reality. This is the problem you run into. Someone calls you a heretic because you're saying their understanding of reality isn't true. Someone's calling you a racist because you criticize some behavior in the black community that you think is self-destructive. Right? Somebody calls you a homophobe or a transphobe because you don't think you should spend a whole month celebrating how somebody likes to have sex. Now, the term conveys only the meaning that you disagree with some orthodoxy of a group of people. Whether or not you're actually the thing they called you, whether you're a homophobe, whether you're a racist, whether you're a heretic, whether you're a Pelagian, the only way you could find that out is through some kind of discussion. You'd have to talk about it. You'd have to go back to this model and compare your ideas to the reality. Because the only thing the label carries is that you disagree with the people who hold the orthodoxy. Whether or not that orthodoxy matches reality takes further discussion. But the reason they throw that label at you is they don't want to have the discussion. They're hoping to chase you away or scare you away with the name. Or at the very least say, hey, listen, if you want to be in with this crowd and don't want to be open to punishment or ridicule or whatever, you need to go along with the orthodoxy. Rather than continuing to challenge that our picture doesn't look like the reality. We don't even want to have that discussion. That's what those names are for. And the reason I say that is, if you take a look at this video here, this video here, and again, I suggest you take a look at it if you're interested in this topic of Unitarianism versus Trinitarianism. This is the idea that God is three persons in one, or just one person, and Jesus and the Holy Spirit aren't God. Some people hold that view. Okay. So Dr. Dale Tuggy is someone who thinks that God is God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are not God. Okay. I think that's what Unitarianism is. I think it is. Dr. Craig happens to be somebody who thinks that the Trinitarian view of God is the accurate model of the reality of who God is. Okay? They have a discussion, and throughout the whole discussion, even though there are many people who would say, if you don't say that Jesus is God, that's a heresy. There's a lot of theologians who would tell you that. There's a lot of people in Christianity who go, oh, you're saying Jesus isn't God? That's
what you just heard was a heresy fest.
Dr. Craig goes through the whole discussion, never mentions heresy once.
What you just heard was a heresy fest.
Because it's not important. It doesn't help. What Dr. Craig does is he listens to Dale Tuggy's reasons for thinking that the Unitarian model is the correct model. Then Dr. Craig gives his data as to why he thinks the Trinitarian model is the correct model. But heresy is never mentioned once. No, there's no point where Dr. Craig says you need to be rebuked.
What you just heard was a heresy fest.
Why? Because when someone calls you a heretic or a homophobe or whatever, here's the assumption they're making. They're making that their position, their orthodoxy, and the reality are the same thing. There's no variance. There's no, flaw in their reasoning with regard to this reality. They're telling you that my understanding of this, whatever thing we're talking about, is perfect, and it's impossible that I'm wrong, because they're in dogma. Now, if that's the case, then yeah, I guess you would be a heretic. But Dr. Craig doesn't assume that position. He goes to what you have to do is the discussion of the details that would either show your position is closer as a closer model of the reality as opposed to the other position. That's the discussion that needs to be had. But the person calling you heretic,
What you just heard was a heresy fest.
calling you homophobe, calling you racist, calling you whatever, what they're telling you is, I don't even want to have this discussion. I don't even want to get into the details because I'm right, you're wrong, it'll never be any different, and I don't want to hear anything about it. It's the intellectual equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ears, covering your eyes, and going la, 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 la.
What you just heard was a heresy fest.
And so what Dr. Craig does is he has a discussion talking about the different views, the different support or lack of support for each view and each picture or each model of some reality. There's not one point at which Dr. Craig goes, you're a heretic and you need to be rebuked, because that assumes that you're right. And unfortunately, that's the thing you're there to discuss, whether or not you're correct. But the dogmatic person, you can never even get there because they don't understand the possibility that they may have modeled it wrong because they think they're the same thing. It's interesting. I had a conversation with a great man, good friend of mine. He's a wonderful man, but he tends to be more liberal and the racism thing. He was my boss for a little bit about a year ago. I moved out, so we don't work there anymore, but fantastic guy. He's the guy who let me show up at his shop, occasion and just do different things from time to time. And he knows that I tend to be more conservative in my views. So one day he calls me into the office and he sits down and he goes, what about this Rittenhouse or Rittenauer? I don't remember the guy's name, but there's some kid, I don't know, a couple of years ago, had a rifle or something, and there was a big trial. Now, I don't know the details because I don't watch the news, and he knows this. So he tells me, boy, America's a racist place because look at this guy, this white kid with a rifle and shooting at black people or something like that. I don't know. I wasn't quite paying attention because, again, I didn't know what happened, so I really didn't have an opinion on it. But his thing was America's a racist country because of this event, right? Although he's a very rich person and he made all his money here in America when he could have left any time, but I didn't bring that up. And so I asked him this. I said, boss, what's the chance? I said, first of all, I don't know what happened, so I'm going to go with how you see it, right? Which is what I always do because, as a cop, you show up to an event, you don't know what happened. Everybody there knows more than you. And so you have to assume someone else's perspective, at least until you get some more data. So this is a normal position that I take. So I asked him, going from your perspective, what are the chances that there's some piece of information, some perspective, some other way of looking at the same event that if you had that perspective might change how you view this event? He's like, what are you talking about? And I just said, how sure are you that you know everything that you should know about this particular event from just watching the news? And he thought about it and he goes, probably not everything. And I go, okay, you're like where I am. I don't know anything about it. So I don't really have an opinion on what happened. You may want to rethink your opinion or at least go out and get more information about it. He sat there and he goes, all right, get out of my office. Okay. The discussion needs to be had about the data as opposed to your perspective of it, rather than your perspective being the reality. And thankfully, my boss is a smart guy, and he realized, the way I understand it may be different than the way it actually occurred. Now, we never talked about it again, so I still don't know what happened with the event. But my point is just recognizing that, yeah, this is how it seems to me. But there might be more information that I just don't have right now, even though it looks like this is the way it is. It'll keep you in a place where you can continue to learn and continue to grow. Because we have a limited ability to gather information and model it. And so to walk around as if your perception is the same thing as reality, it's foolish. And I think that, again, Magritte's picture, I'll show it to you one more time. It's a nice reminder, and that's what hit me when I first saw it. I thought, that's a beautiful reminder that we don't know everything that we know. We think we're right all the time. We think we saw the thing and that's how it happened. But it's a reminder that there's much more to the reality than we could ever replicate in our little noetic structure. And so that should make you humble. That should make you a little less strident about your opinions and what you think is right. That's really all it comes down to. So this is Dr. William Lane Craig on a show called Closer to Truth. I don't know the gentleman's name that you're looking at right now, but he's fantastic because he goes and talks to philosophers and brainy people about their theories. And what he doesn't do is he just doesn't sit there like a bump on a log letting people just kind of blather on. He actually will challenge the ideas that people are bringing out, not from his own perspective, but from challenges that other people have to the ideas that he's bringing out. And it's a really great, it's a great place to hear ideas from two different sides. But here he's talking with Dr. Craig about the Kalam cosmological argument, and specifically the second premise that says that the universe began to exist, which for a while people didn't really know. Most people thought the universe was past eternal until recently. There was a lot of data that these guys, the Board, Guth, and Vilenkin folks, determined that any model would make the universe have a definite beginning. So the gentleman, and again, I don't remember his name, but he's simply challenging Dr. Craig with some of the other ideas, and listen how Dr. Craig answers with humility, understanding that his position or Dr. Craig's understanding of it is different from the reality itself.
Recent experience of a Big Bang is once you go beyond that, either a membrane, different dimensions, or some of these different theories could have oscillations before the Big Bang that we'd never have access to. And maybe that's non-falsifiable, but I don't think those are eliminated.
Well, you're alluding, I think, there to Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turok's so-called brain cosmology, which is an attempt to exploit string theory to develop an eternally oscillating universe in higher dimensions. And they tried to extend this infinitely into the past. But what was discovered in 2003, in the fall of that year, by three cosmologists, Alexander Vilenkin, Arvind Borde, and Alan Guth, the father of inflationary cosmology, through their theorem, they were able to demonstrate that even these models cannot be extended infinitely into the past, but that there has to be a past boundary at some point that represents the beginning of the universe. So even these brain cosmologies and higher dimensional cosmologies, which are really very metaphysical in character, have been shown to be non-infinitely extendable into the past. That is to say that they must have a past boundary.
And so you see how Dr. Craig pauses there for a second to let the interviewer kind of take in that information, but he's got the look like, yeah, he's already included that in his theory that the universe began to exist, right? And it's a pretty solid argument. But listen to how Dr. Craig finishes off.
So while the case is by no means open and shut, the very nature of science is that its results are always provisional. They're always tentative. I think we can say with great confidence that the person who believes in the creation of the universe out of nothing stands solidly within mainstream science today. Minimally, we can say that. And that's quite different from the previous 2,000 years of speculation about the origin of the universe.
That's beautiful. Here's a man who, Dr. Craig, who is one of the leading minds, on the planet, really. Biology, science, philosophy, he's covered it all. And I'm sure he would say himself that he's not the expert in these fields, except for theology and philosophy. I'm sure he's one of the tops. But the point is, there are very few people who understand these ideas, not only individually, but collectively, as well as Dr. Craig. All of the challenges that interviewer presented to him, and there were others previous to that, Dr. Craig was able to not only understand what they knew exactly which ones he was talking about, but explained why they still don't defeat the beginning of the universe. But even after all of that, he says, listen, it's just tentative, and there's new things to learn. Dr. Craig displays that understanding that how I understand the data and the model that I've built from that data is different from reality itself. And while I may be close or have something that seems to look like reality now, there's more information that I can have. And it allows you to grow, it allows you to expand, and to continue to learn. But when you find that person that's telling you you're a homophobe or a heretic or whatever, that's somebody who is stuck in a little box of dogma, and they're afraid for anything to encounter anything that they don't already believe, because they've convinced themselves that what they believe and reality are exactly the same thing. And it's difficult to get any information out of that kind of a conversation, because again, at least as far as I'm concerned, the goal of this series that I'm doing, it's not to tell you how to be right or how to beat people at an argument. It's that when you're encountering somebody, you have the possibility of extracting information so that you can learn something about the world. It's possible that the person you're talking to knows something about reality that you don't know. And with that information, you can get a better model of how the world really is. It's called thinking for yourself. Nobody teaches that anymore. That's not something that society encourages. And when I say society, I'm talking about your church. I'm talking about your academic institutions. I'm talking about politics. I'm talking about every place you go, your workplace. They don't want you thinking for yourself. They want you to buy into whatever their dogma is. And if you start thinking for yourself, people start coming after you because there's fear in ideas that they don't already believe. All right, get out of here. I can keep yammering on all day about that, but that's not even close to all the stuff I had on this. I got some other videos that I show you, but I'll put them in different videos because I think it's a little bit more fun presentation. But I just thought it was important to dig into this idea of this label that you hear constantly all over the place. You're labeled as something because you don't agree. And the person giving you the label has assumed that whatever I believe is the truth, and for you to disagree with it must mean you're bad or evil or stupid or something like that. And oftentimes those people are the dumbest people you'll ever meet. Nice people oftentimes, but the dumbest, because they're locked in their little area of dogma, unfortunately. All right, that's enough. Thanks for tuning into Uncaller today. And again, I really appreciate your support and your comments. I love a lot of the comments. Listen, a lot of people disagree, and that's fine. That's okay. There's a lot of things that I may be getting wrong. But please continue to give me the comments, and please like and please subscribe and share with folks if you think that they'd be interested in this kind of stuff. All right, get out of here. That's enough out of me.